Good evening, Namaskar, Jai Hind. A warm welcome to all on today's episode of Path of Positivity. I'm your host Shweta Rana and you're watching us on an Live. Movement of Positivity is spearheaded by Dr. Jnaneshwar Mule, the current member of NHRC, and Mrs. Hemangi Sinha is the chairperson of Arjun Foundation. Movement of Positivity is a group of NGOs working together to create a positive impact in the society of today. I would like to now invite Mrs. Hemangi Sinha, the chairperson of Arjun Foundation, to join us.
Good evening, Shweta. Namaste.
Good evening, ma'am. Namaskar. A warm welcome to you on today's episode. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much.
taking out your time and joining us today. Uh,
Thank you so much.
Today, on the occasion of the birthday of His Holiness Dalai Lama, we wish him a very happy birthday. My guest today is Mr. Tenzin Lekshay.
Thank you.
Namaste, sir.
Namaskar ji.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar ji.
Namaskar. I would like to introduce my guest, Mr. Tenzin Lekshay. He was born in India to a Tibetan refugee family. He was a recipient of Tibetan Scholarship Program and graduated in International Relations from New York University. He is currently in the Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration as an additional secretary and has been appointed as the official spokesperson of Central Tibetan Administration. He is additionally in charge as the director of the Tibet Policy Institute. Sir, a very warm welcome to you on today's episode. It's an honor for us to have you here today along with us.
Thank you so much for hosting me on this auspicious day on His Holiness 86th birthday. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Uh, Ma'am, I request you to please ask your first question.
Yeah. Sir, can you tell us in brief about His Holiness Dalai Lama's journey from Lhasa to India?
Uh, Now, for the audience, for the larger audience, it is very important to understand first thing who is the Dalai Lama. Who is the Dalai Lama? So
Yes.
let me briefly introduce who is the Dalai Lama for the Tibetan people. Uh, All the Tibetan people believe that His Holiness is the manifestation of Lord of Compassion, our Lokiteshvara. And this
Right.
present Dalai Lama is the 14th incarnation, right?
Exactly.
So therefore, in 1935, in the northeastern Tibet, in a very small hamlet, he was born to a peasant family. And then at the age of 2, he was being recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama by the search party assigned by the Tibetan government, which is based in Lhasa. So the search party went up to the northeast Tibet and then invited him and enthroned him in Lhasa. Right. And since then, His Holiness and all his family members are based in Lhasa, which was the capital city of Tibet. But unfortunately, at that time, the political situation was not good enough because there were lots of troubles in the world, especially with China. Right. And in China, around 1949, when the communist regime came to power, the first thing they highlighted or propagated was to occupy Tibet in the name of liberation. And sensing the urgency of the matter, the Tibetan government right, requested His Holiness and then right, appointed His Holiness right, enthroned him as the spiritual and the temporal leadership of Tibet at the tender age of 16 in 1950, right? And in 1951, the Chinese troops, armies came to and occupied certain part of Tibet, in the north, in the eastern part of Tibet, and then forced the Tibetan government officials to go for a talk for the agreement. But somehow in 1951, the agreement came under duress. The Tibetan officials were forced to sign the agreement, which was called the 17-point agreement. For 8 long years, His Holiness tried to accommodate and adjust with the political system, right, which was inherited on him. And within that time, His Holiness visited China. Within that time, His Holiness also visited India, which are the two giants, Asian giants. Then His Holiness realized that with the advancing Chinese troops coming into Tibet in 1959,
15. Yeah.
right, crushing the Tibetan uprising, right, that felt the Tibetan people to raise against the Chinese communist regime, which forced His Holiness to flee Tibet. But His Holiness secretly fled Tibet, right, in March 1959. People are not aware about that. China was also not aware about that. But in some of the issues which they raised is Chinese leader, when the whole thing issue came up, there was a massacre inside Tibet, especially in Lhasa. Thousands of people died, and they were looking for His Holiness, whether he was alive or dead. When the message was passed to the Chinese government that His Holiness was alive and fled to India, right? Then they said, Chinese leaders said that they lost the war, right? So His Holiness fled to India in 1959, right, and sought asylum. And since then, His Holiness says that in numerous times that he's a longest guest of India. For the last 60 years, His Holiness has been a part of India and called as the Son of India.
Shweta?
Yes. Uh, so we live in very difficult, hard times today, times of violence, times of conflict. And I would want to ask you, how is the message of His Holiness of compassion that he speaks about for the entire world so important right now?
In this year of degeneration, right, His Holiness is the apostle of peace and compassion. Soon after His Holiness came to India, right, in 1959, there were lots of hardship, there were lots of turmoils, there was so much of responsibility shouldered on him. Around 80,000 Tibetans fled with him, followed him to India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And with the request of the Tibetan people, His Holiness, I will just narrate one phrase of the prayer which he composed, the word of truth. Right. So there in 1960, just 1 year after, he composed a prayer, right, a word of truth. In that, I will just recite one para.
Sure, sir.
Those, those unrelentingly true ones, objects of compassion, maddened by delusions evil, gradually destroy themselves and others, may they achieve the eye of wisdom, knowing what must be done and undone, and abide in the glory of friendship and love. Even at that time, His Holiness, as a manifestation of Lord of compassion, he was talking about compassion, even to the enemy, right? So therefore, it was not that it just came out of a blue moon. It was there right from the beginning, as all the Tibetans believed and put faith in him as a lot of compassion. He resonated the compassionate soul, right? And for the Tibetan, for the young Tibetan like us who were being born in exile, but we were blessed by the virtue of the presence of His Holiness, right? And we also seek our struggle in the path of non-violence and ahimsa.
Yes. So,
Very
uh,
true.
s- sir, how does His Holiness inspire to be optimistic and faithful in today's time, sir? Because we are going through a very, very difficult phase, sir. The whole world, sir.
So
Yeah.
His Holiness normally, uh, because His Holiness uh, has four commitments, four lifelong commitments. The first commitment of His Holiness is the universal responsibility, and the second lifelong commitment is the interfaith dialogue, and the
Oh,
third is the preservation of Tibetan culture and environment. And the fourth one, which is the additional one, is the revival of ancient Indian traditions and knowledge. So therefore, when you look at the lifelong commitments, His Holiness, for the last 60 years, met with many different world leaders, many different spiritual leaders, and hold discussions and dialogues with them, right? Even with the non-believers, right? Therefore, His Holiness wants to send a message to the world, even today, during the 86th birthday of His Holiness. If you look at the message which His Holiness gave, right, it assures that he will cherish the ahimsa, the compassion, and non-violence till his death, right? And also requires his followers to follow the same thing, right?
exactly.
So therefore,
Exactly.
I believe that one thing we have to understand that His Holiness says that all the religious traditions which exist in the world longs for love and compassion, right? So therefore, they are in the 20th century. There were wars, there were conflicts, right? Even now also because of the misunderstanding of the faith, right? And also because of the selfishness of
Yeah.
oneself. So therefore, His Holiness message is to be compassionate to others. Once you are compassionate to others, you will also be the beneficiary, right? You are, since you we all are a part of the social animal, right? So if we look beyond yourself to the larger audience, for the benefit of the larger audience, you will also be the part of that and be benefited, right? Therefore, His Holiness, there are lots of messages, right, by His Holiness over the last so many years, and therefore, everybody in the world respects Him, loves Him, trusts Him, put a faith on Him, and to find a solace, right, to be the inspiration in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so we see people nowadays using religion as a tool for the pretext of violence and hate. What are the feelings of His Holiness when people do this?
His Holiness, as I said before, the second commitment is the interfaith dialogue, right? And in the interfaith dialogue, His Holiness says that, right, in the world, right, was being sustained because of the faith. We have large numbers of people who believe in the faith, in different religious traditions, right? So, in every traditions, religious tradition, right, they propagate love and compassion. So how can there be a conflict if they propagate love and compassion? So
Yes. Yes.
therefore, His Holiness try to, right, send a message to the world that the primary, the idea of this religion is to be compassionate. So we have to be compassionate, not just within the different religious traditions, even within the same religious tradition also. We have to exercise, we have to understand each other, we have to also understand the differences and respect the differences. Right. So therefore, if you look at His Holiness over the last 50 years, His Holiness has worked tirelessly, right, to engage between the spiritual masters, right. I myself in 2017, right, 2014, right, was part of the conclave which His Holiness hold among the Indian religious masters, right, which was held in Delhi, right. So therefore, another important message which His Holiness gave is that India is the land which has the tolerations, which tolerates all the religious traditions. Right. India is the land which should be the example for all the world, where all the religious traditions coexist harmoniously. Right.
Absolutely.
Therefore, His Holiness says that he has to revive the ancient Indian knowledge and traditions.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Sir, my curiosity is this, sir. Ki there must be some senior Tibetans who they are believing in non-violence, but sir, the younger generation are they also having same ideology, or they want to confront China, sir?
So it depends now, because future we cannot say what will be the future. If we can predict the future, then our half of the work has been done. So therefore, what we believe is that since His Holiness is our inspiration, His His Holiness is our guru, right? The root guru, and what he propagates is non-violence and compassion. So, as I being the third generation, right, who are born in India, right, I still believe that the message of His Holiness not just help the Tibetan, but help the whole humanity, right? Therefore, propagating or sending the message of love and compassion, right, and the non-violence and ahimsa, all these things are selfless, right?
Yes, sir.
And
Very
it can generate whole. In fact, I would say that because of this all this message of love and compassion, we have consolidated, right, a huge international solidarity and support for the Tibetan cause
yes, sir.
for the last 60
Very,
years.
very true, sir.
Right?
Very true, sir.
Even though our population, the Tibetan population, as compared to China, Tibetan economic status compared to China, right? Everything, if you compare to China, they are the might, they are the giant. We are just like an ant to the elephant. But
Perfect.
but the Tibetan issue is still very much alive, right?
Yes.
Therefore, it's all because of His Holiness message of love and compassion.
Yes. Yes.
Very true, sir. Sir, right now you spoke about international solidarity and support being offered to the Tibetan government in exile. So, what is the support that is being offered by the international community to the Tibetan government in exile?
See, we are grateful to the government of India and the people of India for supporting us for the last 60 years, more than 60 years. India has been our host for the last 6 decades, right? Who have been supporting us humanity, right? We have more than around 70,000 Tibetans living in around India in different settlements, all over the different states, right? So, first thing is, right, we are grateful to the Indian government and the public. And second thing is for all the international community who support us, who show solidarities, not just in the political front, but also in a humanitarian assistance, right? And all over the world, we have a huge support networks, right, of the people who believe in non-violence, who believe in ahimsa, who believe in justice, and who also believe in the truth, right? As in Indian independence movement, right? As Lal, I would say that it must be Bal Gangadhar Tilak, maybe. Saurashtra is my birthright. I shall have it,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So for the Tibetan, freedom is our birthright, right? And all the Tibetan, wherever they are, will strive to gain freedom and also to seek the aspirations, to fulfill the aspirations of the Tibetan people inside Tibet, right? So therefore, for the last 60 years, there were lots of international support for us, right? And it will continue to remain, right? As long as the truth prevails.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, what role does Tibet play in Indo-China relationship?
See, you have to go back to the history again, right?
Yes.
So, as a matter of fact, right, before 1959, if we look at the border, it was India-Tibet border, right?
Yes, sir.
China was a distant neighbor. It was not
Exactly.
immediate neighbor. But
Exactly.
in 1959, after China occupied Tibet, right, they became a neighbor, a close neighbor, and the border remained a tension. But somehow you have to go back to the history, right, of India taking the legacy of the British traditions, right. So therefore, I would say that uh, normally, right, they used to say Tibet was a
Yes, sir.
buffer.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
in the future, I see the potential. I see the potential not as a buffer between India and China, because so far both India and China watch for a friendship, a true friendship. Every now and then, the leaders from the two great countries talked about friendship, but it didn't happen so far. It didn't happen so far. India never considered China as a friend.
Yes.
Neither China considered India as a friend because there was a historical gap. So the gap can be filled by the Tibetan. And rather than being a buffer, being a static, non-active right player, but Tibetan can be an active player, but by right, engaging both the two giants, right, and be a bridge between the two giants by our traditions, Nalanda traditions, the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, right? So in India is being there's a thriving Tibetan Buddhist traditions, right? In China, right? They are, I would say that they are waiting desperately for the peace of mind. The Chinese people, they being traditional Buddhists. So therefore,
Yes.
I believe that the Tibetan in the future can actively play as a bridge between the two great Asian giants.
Absolutely.
Uh, so we see and hear stories of human rights violations of Tibetans by the Chinese government, and it's a known issue. Over the years, how has the government in exile, the Tibetan government in exile, have had its change in policy and stance in this context?
Yes, right now the Tibetan government exile, the so-called Tibetan government exile, we call it Central Tibet Administration, which is based in Dharamsala. Uh, the policy is the middle way policy, right? A middle way policy, we don't go with the two extremes. One extreme is we will not look beyond the history. History is uncompromised. We will not talk about history.
Mm-hmm.
As we believe that Tibet was independent, right? So we'll not talk about that. It's an uncompromised that. But the present situation right now, right? is disturbing, right? It's deteriorating. So it shouldn't be also there. So in the future, there should be a forward-looking. So there should be a dialogue between the Tibetan government in exile and the Chinese government to talk about a resolution of the Sino-Tibetan conflict, which is prevalent right now for the last 50 years. Right. So the most important part is that it need to be fulfilled the aspirations of the Tibetan people who are inside Tibet. As long as the aspirations of Tibetan people inside Tibet is fulfilled, right, our right issue is resolved. So far, China has been claiming that they have developed Tibet. They have developed Tibet economically, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Project Lhasa as the happiest city in China. So they try to give different narratives, right? But in reality, there's a fear, there's an anxiety. There are lots of issues which suppress the Tibetan right traditions, right? Tibetan freedom. We cannot exercise the freedom. Even you cannot even keep the photo of His Holiness the Dalai Lama
Oh, yes.
Okay.
inside Tibet. So therefore, so even His Holiness has divorced from the political leadership since 2011. He is right, the spiritual master. But China still considers that this is the crime to even
Very
keep the foot of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So therefore, right now, no matter how much China developed Tibet economically, it has never fulfilled the aspirations of the Tibetan people in preserving the Tibetan
very
tradition and
Culture.
culture, and also environment.
Yes.
So there are grievances.
oh,
So therefore, the Chinese government has to look beyond what they are doing right now and remedify what they are doing to fulfill the aspirations of the Tibetan people. Right. So therefore, the Tibetan government exile since 1979, right, we propagate the middle way policy, right,
okay.
engage with China on a numerous occasion. Now the ball is in the Chinese court.
Exactly. Yes,
China
sir.
need to walk and have the political will to resolve the conflict.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Exactly, sir.
very
Yes, sir. So we are witnessing violence, conflict, and aggression, sir, everywhere. Sir, how can the teaching of His Holiness Dalai Lama be a catalyst to change the current situation?
Just look, His Holiness in every messages he gave, he was not talking about right one particular community, but as his first commitment is a universal dialogue,
Yes.
harmony. But His Holiness message goes universal, even to the non-believers. So therefore, the latest one, if I can talk about, because His Holiness says about the education curriculums. The present education curriculum, right, is materialistic. It's all about selfish needs, right? So there should be a new curriculum of having enriching your mind, right, your wisdom,
Yes.
right, and your knowledge. So therefore, the secular ethics, curriculum of secular ethics, right, which also goes beyond India.
Yes.
If you look at today's birthday message by the Delhi Chief Minister, Arjun, but His Holiness has also been a part of the curriculum in Delhi schools
Yes.
in introducing right the curriculum for mind, a peace of mind, right, for being selfless. So therefore, it is not just the existence, the whole existence of His Holiness is not about Tibet alone. His Holiness is for the larger humanity, for all the humanity. So therefore, the message of love and compassion, right, goes beyond and all over the world. Therefore, His Holiness gets respect. His Holiness being loved, right, by everybody.
Very true. Uh, Sir, I want to ask you this, that the teaching of His Holiness Dalai Lama are renowned in the world for being ones of compassion, love, peace, and non-violence. But a certain country alleges him to be a separatist leader, an aggressor. So, how is the CTA working on this?
See, as the embodiment of compassion, His Holiness, our struggle is a non-violent struggle.
Yes,
But from the counterpart, the China, right, they claimed His Holiness as a separatist, right. The Tibetan whole movement, they tried to give a tag of being a terrorist, right. They tried to distract the international support movements. So therefore, what now the people are not fooled. The current world was not the 20th century, 18th century, 17th centuries, but everybody, the information is at the fingertip these days. So the truth, as I said before, we long for truth, right? And truth speaks volume. Even though you are a marginal community, but even though you are small, even though you are being right considered as a suppressed, but the truth speaks volume. As for China, but they always regard His Holiness as being a sort of like an enemy, right? But somehow, right? They always talk to His Holiness as something like right in a demeaning way. In some time they said right monks in the wolf shop, demon. They call him like a demon for their political purpose.
Yes, sir.
But it didn't serve them well because right now China has been focusing on the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Right. The one they call him as the demon. How can they be so passionate about
Yes.
choosing the reincarnation of the
Very true,
so-called
sir.
devil?
Very true.
Right.
very true,
They patronize,
very true.
as he always says, that
Yes.
as a communist China, right, their paramount leader was Mao Zedong, right? He was a houseman. Their paramount leader was Mao Zedong. They believe in Mao Zedong thought. So first thing, if they are very particular in choosing the reincarnation, first thing is that they have to choose the reincarnation Mao Zedong, not the Dalai Lama, right? Because the Tibetan religious tradition, the Buddhist tradition is different from the Chinese tradition. But now
Very,
the China again politicized the religious tradition by right, converting the Tibetan tradition into the Chinese characterizations. But we, in exile for the Tibetan, all the canons, all the Buddhist texts, right, are being translated from India, right?
Yes.
From is a
yes,
Nalanda tradition, right? But China, right, irrespective of the fact that the Tibetan, all the Buddhist traditions and the texts, the root texts, were from India, but they claim that the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is a Chinese tradition. So therefore, we need to understand what China does, what China do, for the sake of their political purpose,
yes,
not for not for being right aesthetic or being compassionate, being right uh, tolerate to the Tibetan tradition. No, right now in Tibet, all the monasteries, all the religious constitutions became like a museum, living museum. Right. So therefore, the world need to understand where the Tibet is and where it should be. And the best part is that whatever His Holiness has given the way through the middle way policy, it will not only help the Tibetan but also help the Chinese and the larger world.
Yes, yes, very true. Sir, why did China is so insecure about Tibet, sir? So, I mean, people of Tibet is so loving, peace loving, sir. They are not aggressors. They are not materialistic. Nothing, sir. Sir, why China is so insecure?
Because China, as I believe, uh, was a victim of colonization in the past history. At present, the Chinese President Xi Jinping also talks about the regenerations of China, right? So what we felt is after the Western power, this right decolonized the different states, right? China became a new colonizer, right? And then expanded the expanded the region to the far west, to Tibet and to East Turkestan and to the southern Mongolia, right? So therefore, they are the expansionists, right? So therefore, what we believe is that for Tibet, we have a different civilization. It was deeply rooted with the traditions and culture which is different from China, right? But these traditions, right, are supposed to be a kind of a breaking point for China, right? China, over the last so many years, if you look at China, if they are considering Tibet as their own, will they treat Tibetans separately? No, they what they did, right? Tibetans have become a minority in their own country, but now the threat is that they are empowering the Chinese people to move to Tibet and settle inside Tibet. There was a demographic shift, but they want
Yes.
to assimilate Tibet. But somehow the rich Tibetan tradition and culture, which survived and thrived for the last thousands of years, right? It cannot be destroyed within 60 years, 70 years, right? So therefore, I think we need to look back in 1954 when Mao Zedong whispered into His Holiness ears by saying that religion is poison, right? And the Tibetan thrived, the Tibetan identity, Tibetan culture thrived because of the religion tradition, right? Therefore, for China, it is right. If they want to be the master as they want to be, they have to be realistic. They have to be compassionate. They have to fulfill the aspirations of the people, not of the state, not of the party, but of the larger public, right? So right now, China has just celebrated this 100 years of this existence of CCP, right? They were in jubilant. But if you look at the history of CCP, Communist Party, millions of people died. Millions of people died, not just Tibetan, even the Chinese, right? So are you being jubilant for the party who, right, crushed the people. Recently, if you look back in 1989,
Yes,
that
sir.
means Japan,
Tiananmen Square. Yes, sir.
yes,
Tiananmen Square.
right. Not
Yeah.
just Japan, even their own people, they have a guts to,
Sir,
right, crush
Tiananmen
them.
Square, sir, it is a great example of their behavior, sir.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
very much,
Violation.
very much. So
yeah.
therefore, I think, right, the Chinese political leader, right, as I narrate the His Holiness prayer, the word of truth, right,
Yes.
we need to inculcate the eye of wisdom, right, to abide in the glory of friendship and love. So once they once they do that one, then they can become benign, they can become benevolent. Otherwise, they will remain as a belligerent regime, right, who can crush upon the sentiments of the people. So therefore, I believe that the Chinese leader will get the wisdom from His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Uh, so I want to ask you this, that there has been a huge change in the world political scenario in the last 2 decades, especially. What are the views of His Holiness on this?
See, His Holiness has relieved from the political temporal leadership since 2011. So far, over the last so many years, His Holiness met with 490, more than 490 world leaders, including presidents, prime ministers, right, of different countries. He visited more than 60 different countries, right? And for His Holiness, whenever His Holiness spoke to the audience, everybody became equal, right? Every everybody became equal. So therefore, if you look at His Holiness, right, statements, His Holiness start with dear brothers and sisters. So therefore, it connects with the people. His Holiness tried to, right, induce love and compassion to all, not just the world leaders, but to the younger generations. And His Holiness says that unlike 20th century, this century to 21st century should be the century of peace and love and compassion. For that one, the younger generation should be the one who should be in the front. Therefore, as I said before, the curriculum of secular ethics is very important step, is a very important initiative by His Holiness to induce love and compassion to the young minds so that the future generation can thrive peacefully.
Excellent, sir.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yes, Shweta?
Hmm. Uh, Sir, thank you so much for joining in with us today and giving us your precious time and speaking so passionately about what the thoughts of everyone on this issue are. Each and everyone wants to live in a world that is one of peace, compassion, equality, kindness, and non-violence. And we are honored that on the day today, we could speak to you and have the vision of His Holiness spread to our viewers. So, thank you so much for joining in with us today. We are
And I
indeed
Thank you so
honored.
much, sir. Thank you so
And
much, sir.
I thank you, Shweta and Hemangi ji, and also for the host, the part of the movement of positivity, right? And also the Arjun Foundation for giving me the chance to speak about on this very auspicious day. of the 86th birthday of His Holiness. So I thank you and wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.